I wasn't as afraid for you, actually, Robert. No, it was kind of amazing. We got to see Lone Pine in every circumstance, weather-wise, but it was gorgeous always.
That was the only time that ever happened. Otherwise, it's fair and warmer every day, except for today.
Am I on?
Yes.
I have no memories of this film. But the residuals are good. You get this green envelope if you're in the Writers Guild, and they send you your residuals. So you end up looking forward to that green envelope. And every now and then, you get some piece of shit mail in a green envelope, and you get excited, and it's not a check. Oh, back to Tremors. My memories are just varied, one of which was Ron and Steve and I started. We actually, when I drove across country to go to USC Film School as a grad student, the first person I met when I walked into that old ramshackle building, I think, was Steve. And the second person I met was Ron. And then at that point, I could have quit school and saved all that tuition. But I stayed for 2.5 more years and did my master's thesis on Jacques Tati, the French comedian. And I got it published as a book, too. It's a really bad book, but it was, at any rate, Tremors, right. There's a lot of Tati influence, if you'll notice, in Tremors. So we worked together, actually, doing educational films back in the day when you would do these 16mm educational films. You know, they'd roll the projector into the classroom and show you a movie, and you could go to sleep while it was on. That's what we did, and I was leading up to something. I've completely forgot what it was. Well, oh yes. So we made these movies. We would shoot them and direct them and cut them and do everything. And we always dreamed someday we would make a feature film, like a real Hollywood movie. So years later, we're out here in Lone Pine making a real Hollywood movie, and we thought, this is just as grubby as making these little educational films. You know, you're dusty, sweaty, under pressure, you know, you're just working so hard to get this thing done. We thought there would be some degree of luxury and ease with a, you know, Hollywood budget, but there wasn't. Largely because the film is very ambitious, which you only realize when you're making a movie that you've actually written, and you're in the middle of a scene and you're realizing this is impossible to shoot. You want to get angry at somebody, and then you realize it's yourself. And that was a common experience. One last thing I think I know I'm rambling, but so what? I think Tremors probably was the last, or one of the last, effects movies that had nothing before CGI came in, computer generated images. Everything you see is real, whether it's incredible miniatures by the Skotak brothers or Tom and Alex graboids, which they built and made work. All of that is real. There's no digital anything in that movie, and we're really proud of that. It really worked out. Thank you.
And Ivo, would you like? Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh yes, and on the end of the table, let me introduce the great Ivo Cristante. Ivo Cristante was our production designer.
I was going to say something about it. Can I?
Yeah. Sure.
Do I have to press a button on this?
Hi. I guess my great memory is being introduced to the force of nature, and one of them being the Dust Devil, and the other one is Sugar Sand. The Dust Devil, I think it was early on we were putting up the frame of Chang's market, and the Dust Devil came up and moved the whole shebang over about 25 feet.
Ooh.
And it couldn't live there, you know. I mean, everybody thought, well, it's moved, we can't tear it down and we need to move it back. We were too tight on the schedule. And so someone just came up with the idea, well, how about if we all move it back? And which we did. We got everybody that we could manage, and we lifted the whole building up, moved it back. And then from that point on, we ended up tying down all the set pieces in the entire town. And we would take the lines down every time the shot was in that direction. And in some of the still pictures in the hall, you will actually see the water tower with lines going to the ground, to anchor point. That's why they're there, just insurance against more dust devils. And they were coming on a regular basis, so that's my vivid memory.
Sugar sand. Never heard of it.
Sugar sand is quicksand without water. And we encountered it quite often when we were digging the trench for the aqueduct. And in that whole area, I can't quite remember what part of the flats we were shooting in, but in that area, I remember driving through it, and you'd hit a patch of it, and then suddenly it's talcum powder completely around you. You have to stop, wait for 5 or 6 minutes until it all drifted, settled back down again, and then slowly ease out of it. But it's basically quicksand without water. So, we would be trenching it with a grater, and then suddenly hit a pocket of sugar sand, and the whole thing would come coming down like literally water. So, yeah, it's force of nature. Long time. Enjoy it.
Well, as the film commissioner, I have to step in here and say, actually, we do have nice days, too. But we try not to schedule them when the movie's here. We just schedule so we can go out and hike. Let's see. Brent, would you, you've done this before, but excuse me, would you talk about land sharks and the origin of the idea?
Oh, yeah.
It's on.
Is that on?
Yep.
Good. Actually, Steve should talk about it because it was his idea, but I will talk about it. Steve and I, while we were writing and doing these educational films, often with Ron, barely squeaking by financially, our lives were becoming pathetic. There's a certain point in your late 20s when nothing is happening. You realize, oh, I'm the loser, And that's where we were. So we were frantically writing screenplays, trying to break into Hollywood. And we wrote Short Circuit, and that sold, and we got our career going. And we wrote a number of other movies. We had a pretty good run there. And every movie that we wrote that was made, there was something about it that really annoyed us. And sometimes you just don't know, did the director read the screenplay or what, and so our agent, Nancy Roberts, who later became a producer with us, said, stop whining, write a spec script, on your own, and see if you can get it going with you as producers, make it yourself. And that's what we did with Tremors, getting that going. What was the question?
It was about the
Yeah.
origin of the idea.
So we got to a point. We got to a point where before we came up with the idea for Tremors, we knew we wanted to write something on our own, and so we went back into our note files, cigar boxes filled with scraps of paper with really bad ideas on them, or whatever. And Steve came up with a little, I guess, yellowed piece of paper that said. Steve liked to go out in the desert, and he worked in the desert in the summertime down near the Naval Weapons Center. And he'd go out and sit on boulders in the middle of the desert on a Saturday because it was a cool place to hang out. And the thought that came to Steve, who's to some degree paranoid, thought, well, what if I'm on this rock and there's creatures under the ground that want to eat me? How am I going to get off this rock? It was something to that effect. And that was the one out of the dozens of notes and ideas we had that made sense. Well, that could be a movie. That could be a movie, Monsters Under the Dirt. And so that's where that started.
Steve?
It took a lot of permutations. Originally, it was a much more comedic movie. And we had to dial back the comedy because we realized we wanted people to take the graboid somewhat seriously. But that's where it started. We owe it to Steve.
So, Steve, do you want to add anything to that? I've heard a story about antlions also that featured in
Oh,
it.
that is actually true. Yes, part of my paranoia about sitting on the rock was based on the antlion, which is common around here, and which I saw a lot when I was working on the Naval Weapons Center down in Ridgecrest. It's a strange little creature. It's actually small, but it's terrifying in its concept. It's a little ant-shaped thing with huge mandibles, and it digs a cone-shaped hole in the sand, and it sits under the sand at the bottom of the hole, and ants walk along, and they get onto the edge, and the sand gives way, the sugar sand gives way, and they slide down, and then these huge mandibles come up and yuck into the dirt. And I actually watched this happen around my little apartment in Ridgecrest, and so that, in combination with climbing around on the rocks, made me think, what if there was a giant antlion? That's where the graboids came from.
And they've gotten a lot bigger, so today when you're out on a tour, watch out.
And the idea, I think you had was land sharks.
Oh,
And
it
then,
was
and
originally
then,
called land sharks.
and then Saturday Night Live had skits that they started calling land sharks,
Totally
so
ripped
they
off our
ruined that.
So it was a ways until you actually got to filming. I don't know, Ron, can you summarize that quickly, all the things that happened between land sharks and, Tremors?
Wow, well, I mean, it was 5 years from the time we started talking about this idea until we went into production, got a green light from Universal to do it. And so during those 5 years, we first went to studios with the idea and went into studio executives' offices and were met with just blank stares. When we would talk about these underground monsters, 30-foot long monsters that would barrel underground at high speed, they didn't even smile. It was like, they didn't get it. And so that's why Brent said that Nancy said, you're gonna just have to write this. So Brent and Steve set aside time to write on spec the script, and then everybody could see the characters were there, the tone was there on the page, and then it was just a matter of finding the studio that would want to do that. And we went to Disney, and Michael Eisner didn't like dust, so that was out for them. And but there was an executive at Universal, Jim Jacks, who had worked with the Coen brothers and Sam Raimi, and really got this story, really understood it. And our agent at the time, Nancy, got it to him and to Gail Hurd, who gave the studio confidence that we knew what we were doing. And then we started looking for how to do this film. I remember coming out here, the first time I came to Lone Pine to look, I first went to Ridgecrest since the idea started in Ridgecrest. So I went to Ridgecrest. I just was driving my car from LA, and I was in the middle of nowhere and got a flat tire. And I thought, this Ridgecrest must not be the right place, because it was a nightmare trying to change my tire.
Try living there.
But then I came to Lone Pine, and I just loved it. And then when Universal started giving us some money, we took a jet all over the West, and
That was fun.
and
They gave us a jet.
yes, we got a jet, but we ended up, our last stop was here in Lone Pine, and this
We've
was the
loved it
place.
ever since.
Yeah. This was always going to be the
Yeah.
place.
Especially
And-
the weather.
Every time I come into Lone Pine, I it's like I'm seeing it for the first time. It's such a beautiful setting, and I think it was the perfect place for this film.
Steve, what is your, let's see, how can we phrase it? Why do you think Tremors 30 years later attracts a whole room full of people and a very passionate fan base. What is magical about the movie?
Well, that is a hard question to answer. You know, when you're making a film, you should believe in it, and we really believed in this idea, and we really liked these characters that we had created. And I would not have said when the movie came out that it was so magical, because most of you may know, it didn't do great. It didn't lose money, I don't think. But I did get a call from the head of the studio the weekend it came out and said, well, we blew it, which was very depressing. And so at that point, we certainly didn't think we'd be sitting here 30 years later with a room full of fans, or that I would still be answering questions online from fans. And but to try to answer your question, everything that we tried to put in the movie, did work, I think, in retrospect, even though people didn't quite know what to make of it when it came out. And it, because of home video, almost as soon as it came out, the home video market started. And it was a few years later then that it just took off in home video, and many people have the same story of renting the tape and wearing it out in their family homes. I got a letter from a kid in Australia who lived way in the outback, and he said, I've worn out the local videotape, what do I do? So anyway, I guess the answer is whatever magic we were able to achieve, was always there. It just took a while for it to be recognized.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
The one thing that I think doesn't get expressed often enough is that when I first got a copy of the script for my interview, I kind of recognized the script as being, well, for lack of a better word, perfect. It was the type of script that ought to be taught in scriptwriting class. The fact that it was about a monster is basically irrelevant, but the way the script is structured, the development of the characters, each character has their own agenda, they have their own lives, and this stupid bloody worm keeps on getting in the way. And people related to the frustrations, I believe, and related to a lot of aspects of the script, but I've read and worked on over 250 scripts in my career, and I still consider this one of the best scripts I've ever worked on. So that, I think,
One of the things that always impresses me, and I just saw it with a bunch of high school kids, more than half had never seen it. And they live here, which surprised me, number one, but there's a whole new audience, I think, of younger people who are ready to discover Tremors again. So, but Ron, one of the things I love about how you switch from comedy to horror to comedy, and it was sort of maybe one of the first movies that, sci-fi horror movies that did that. How was that for directing? And
well, that was the tone that was in the script. So I just had to do what was in the script, and then it would work. But
You make it sound a little too easy.
It is a tricky tone to maintain, and we did, like Brent was saying, we had to take out humor at times, and that went all the way through the editing, because you didn't want to take away from the scares or the legitimacy of the creatures. And I feel sometimes people misunderstand the tone of Tremors, I think. We're not making fun of these people. Are really courageous people who are coming together to save their community from an evil thing. And they're successful in it because they come together. And so we didn't want to make fun of the people. They had their quirks, certainly, and but they're fun characters that you care about, and you have to use humor in the right way and not make fun of the people or the monsters have to be real. And the best special effect for making the monsters really feel real is the actors' reactions to those monsters, because when they believe, you believe.
And Brent, did you want to add something about that?
No.
All right. This is probably something that Ivo and Alec will talk about this afternoon. But I wondered how much, I was out at the aqueduct yesterday. We have a guy here, Roger Hurt, I don't know, he's somewhere. And he has done a phenomenal job of finding, why don't you raise your hand a little bit? He's a retired military fighter pilot, and I don't know if that had anything to do with it, but he gave us the most wonderful diagrams on how to find everything, and I mean everything. So he spent quite a bit of time in that weather in the spring finding this stuff. But I wondered how much of the special effects were created on site, or how you shot them, and how much was all planned out. So I don't know who's best. Sounds like Brent. Brent, did you want to say something?
No, I'm just inhaling.
Okay. Well, do that and then tell us about it.
Well, this is on, right? It's funny when you talk about it, you don't know whether it's on or not. Is it on?
Yes.
Yes, you're on. You're on.
You'd think it would sound loud in my ears. I don't know. Everything was carefully planned. Wasn't it?
It was.
Good. It was. You can't go out there and start winging it because it was so ridiculous what we were trying to do. So it didn't always work. Here's an interesting moment in the film. The last night of shooting. It's the middle of the night. It's dark. It's cold. And we're trying to sink a station wagon in the ground. The doctor's just been pulled underneath. And then his wife, the wonderful Bibi Besh, no longer with us, is hiding in the station wagon. You remember that? Remember station wagons?
Yes.
And the station wagon was supposed to be pulled down under the ground. And so it's on a rig, big rig, hydraulic rig or something, mounted in a hole that's about, how many feet deep? Probably 10 feet deep. And it's supposed to go down at least far enough that you would feel like this thing's getting swallowed.
It was a pool.
It was a pool of water, but floating on top of it was this very light, dirt-like substance called vermiculite. So it looks like the ground. Very clever, and it didn't work. So we're stuck there at 3 a.m. trying to go, what the fuck do we do now? And what we did was we relied on our USC Film School training, because we'd edited so many movies, especially as educational film stuff. We thought, well, we're going to make this station wagon look like it sinks, doing it in cuts, or what they call a montage in film school. And that's what we did. And so that we just got a bunch of shots. If you cut them together in the right order, you imagine the station wagon is sinking down. So that was a challenge that we overcame by our brilliance. But prior to that, it was all planning, and most of the stuff worked out great. We had one instance where the store, you remember Chang's store, where most of the action takes place, that it's the roof of the store is supposed to collapse underneath Kevin and Fred as the graboids are getting more persistent. And I don't think it worked, or they weren't ready for it. So Ivo, who wasn't a special effect, Ivo was just building the entire world that you saw. Ivo stepped up and said, well, I'll make the roof collapse, even though it wasn't his job. And he figured out some rather straightforward way of
With springs.
Sitting right here.
what's that? Well, I'll give you my version.
Apparently, the way I remember it was that the roof rig was not in the contract for the mechanical effects guys, and we kind of figured out that wasn't the case, and so someone had to do it. And I had worked on a wrestling movie before, a year or two before, and wrestling rinks have all the joists going down to the center where there's a coil spring. And so I thought of putting 6 scaffolding towers inside the store on top of the top platform there was a coil spring, and each coil spring was holding a odd-shaped plate made of 2x6s and plywood, and then the roofing material kind of all tied it together, but we didn't make sure that the wood wasn't going to bind. And it balanced very, very well, and we basically tied all of the platforms together with rope, brought them down to one central point, counterweighted it, and one guy, sitting in a chair, was moving this whole rig up and down, and the whole roof would undulate, and it was I was very proud of that.
I remember. Remember, Ivo is the production designer, not the special effects guy, and he came to the set one day because we had this problem. And that's how I remember it too, is that it just kind of didn't get contracted, and the mechanical effects guys were overwhelmed with all the stuff they had to do already. And Ivo came to the set one day with a little 3x3 foot piece of plywood. We were standing on that spring. He demonstrated it to me. Ivo said, "This is how it's going to work." I'm going, okay. And it worked beautifully. It's one of the best effects of the film.
Dan Dickman is here today. He worked with it, and he takes great pride in being one of the undulators.
It's an undulator, right?
Yeah, so among many other things.
That roof design was one of the best effects we had in the physical effects, in that it worked every time and was repeatable, and you could put it back to normal. The roof sank, and you could put it back to a regular roof. It was great. But I wanted to mention that last night, where this car wouldn't sink, it was really heartbreaking because we never got the scene as written. Because in the scene as written, the car's going down, and Megan kicks the windshield out, and she climbs out up onto the hood, and she's like a hood ornament up on the hood going down with the ship. It would have been just an amazing image.
Like the Titanic.
Like the Titanic, before its time. And, c'est la vie. But I mean, making movies is always just continual feelings of exhilaration followed by great despair. And that was one of those moments of despair. And unfortunately, it was the last night. So we had despair for a while there.
Yeah.
But another physical effect that actually worked really surprisingly well was for the traveling of the creature underground. We built trenches. The effects crew dug trenches, and we just took a big pontoon buoy, and tied it to a truck, a pickup truck, and put dirt mats over the trench, and just drove. And it was so simple. It was such a nice thing. And the same thing worked at Chang's Market then, with the floorboards going up with the trench underneath. So it was nice.
That was simple.
Yeah, they really came through with a great way to do those.
Yeah.
That's the fun of this one.
Yeah.
This one's better than yours. That's the fun of filmmaking. Basically, I realize this as I get older and older, and I have these brief moments of these epiphanies where I realize something that's true, and I go, "Well, that's good. Before I die, I'd like to learn a couple things." And I realize the whole reason to go into filmmaking is you just want to fool people. I've just fooled you. It's like, you believe that? It's all bullshit. And it's a real thrill. It really is. And so pulling a buoy under the fucking dirt, it was just, and it works. And if you put a camera on one side of it, it goes by screen right to screen left. And you put another camera on the other side, same shot, goes by screen left to screen right, so you get two shots for one, which is great, and that's fun. And we haven't touched on the brilliant Skotak brothers, who were the masters of miniatures in Hollywood, did a lot of stuff with Jim Cameron. We got them to do a lot of miniature shots, miniature graboids, miniature desert and stuff, and that was incredibly effective. This was this amalgamation of everything. There's even a glass painting in there.
Matte painting.
Matte painting, maybe the last one ever done in Hollywood. I know I'm exaggerating this, but every old classic technique we used, except for stop motion animation, right? Steve's a stop motion animator, by the way. There's no stop motion, although Steve and I were roommates for years, and we spent an entire year in our apartment, Steve making a stop motion animated movie. So we were living in a movie set. He won many awards for that one, but it has nothing to do with this. It was fun to try all these techniques, and they really worked. Plus, we were great editors. Did I mention that before? So we knew how to save our asses. Thank you.
Do you have a one favorite thing in the finished product, Steve?
Me?
Yeah.
Wow, favorite thing.
Or one of your favorite things. It's always hard to get one, but.
Well, the roof gag is one of my favorites, partly for the same reasons for Ron. It just works so beautifully, and you could just do it over and over. It was such a strange idea. Well, okay, for me, I was very close to the character of Bert, and I grew up during the Cold War, and we live in Hawaii, and people literally were putting bomb shelters in their backyards. So I felt like I knew that character, and I grew up in the country, and we always had guns around the house and so forth. So I was close to the character of Bert. So probably the basement sequence, because it came together, because it worked. And by then we'd worked with the full-scale graboid a lot, and the effects people had worked up a way of mounting the graboid literally on a railroad track behind Bert's wall. And it was terrifying when it was coming toward you, because it sounded like a train was coming. And it blasted through this fake brick wall, and then Michael Gross and Reba McEntire cut loose with that entire wall worth of guns. And it always brings the house down in a screaming. So I guess for me, it's probably my favorite.
So maybe we can bring Bert up, since he's sitting in the front row.
Bert's sitting right there. No stage behind. Yeah.
Steve, we'll do that later.
We're actually going to have an autograph session later, I think. It's great to be a member of such a esteemed company.
So, Bert, talk to us about Bert, how you created the character. I know it came out of the script, but.
Well, it did, and that's the most important thing I want to say. There's a famous biblical passage that goes, "In the beginning was the Word," and that's the way it was here. It's that simple. I had to do very little, and I tried to do it as best as I could, because it was well written from the start. This was a comically paranoid, obsessive, compulsive, disordered man. And I could immediately relate, as my wife can tell you. No, this was partly Steve. I think Steve is Bert Gummer. He says there's a little, I can relate to it. It's more than that. Steve is the heart and soul of Bert, and I just try to channel Steve Wilson at all times. This was a little bit of my father, who always saw the dark side of things. If things were bad, they were just going to get worse. I used to say of my father, for him the glass was always full, and that glass was full of cyanide. And Bert is a little bit like that. I mean, things are always going to get worse. And oh, you've been watching the news lately, have you? So that was the fun of it. All I had to do was stay out of the way of this writing, to be quite frank. And then it grew on me, and I began to feel at home and at one with this person. And I will say too, this was an amazing number of collaborators. It was one of my first feature films, and I just didn't know how wonderful it could be when you could step on a set and say, let's do it this way, and what do you guys think of this idea? And they were so amazingly easy about it. Now, it didn't mean you always got your way or anything like that, but they were willing to try things, and there was a collaborative feeling on the set, which was such a joy. They made everyone, myself, Reba, Kevin, all the actors feel valued. We had something to contribute to it, and they were willing to listen. And I just thought, well, is it going to be terrifying? They're going to be under so much pressure. There's not time to do it. Is every word sacrosanct? And they were just so willing and open to work things out in the moment, and that is a precious thing. They made us all feel as if we were collaborators.
Well, you came with great ideas too, and you had lots of ideas.
Well, I don't remember those. I just
Lots of
remember I
good
had
ideas.
good lines to start with.
I remember Michael coming to us with a script, and he had a marvelous way of he had a little tiny circle that he would put next to each of Bert's lines, and then he had alternate versions of the lines.
But I always did it your way first.
Oh, yeah, no. What he says is absolutely true. We were collaborating, but especially as the character grew, and Michael became more and more part of it. And I believe you bought supplies to keep in your house, did you not?
Well,
Earthquake supplies?
Look, I live in Southern California. You have to have earthquake supplies.
He adopted
Thousands of gallons of gas.
But anyway, yeah, it was a collaborative process. But I was always struck with his script with the little circles. And you always saw those coming, and you go, okay, we're going to have a discussion with Michael now.
That script, by the way, is here at the Lone Pine Museum.
Yes, it is.
You can see it. I donated my working script, and it's in a little glass case over in the Tremors area.
Nice.
And your falcons. We have scripts, and what's wonderful about these scripts, and we have lots of scripts here from movies made here, not made here, and they're in different colors all the way through. Does somebody want to explain what the colors indicated and how they got there? I don't know which.
Every draft is in. Oh, you tell me. You have white pages as the production draft of a script, and then you want to have different colors so that you know that there's been changes made. So then you get blue pages next, and then
So you know the latest.
yeah,
So you know the latest page. The problem with being a writer is that if you're conscientious, you keep reading your script while you're shooting it, and you might sit there on page 87 and go, I'm going to just change one word in this line of dialogue, but that means it's going to trigger a new color. So everybody on the movie, 157 people, will be handed page 87 in pink instead of blue. Then they've got to put it in their script, and they're all going, fuck you, you changed one word, and I need a new thing. And then you go, well, is it really worth it? And then you go, well, yes, it is. And, that's just, what goes on.
Related to that, by the way, it does remind me, Mindy, the character of Mindy, was cut out of the script for a time. And then as Universal got more supportive of us and realized that we maybe weren't going to waste their money, we weren't going to screw it up, Mindy went back in. I remember writing a memo. No, you sent me the memo. That's what Ron just recently found a memo that I wrote that said, Mindy's back in the script. And then The Sinking Car was not in the script for a very long time. For budgetary reasons, we were really trying to exactly hit our budget, and Ron mentioned the executive, Jim Jacks, who was very supportive. He was a super movie buff, so he got what this was. He knew the 50s movies that I knew, 50 science fiction movies, and he really went to bat for us at Universal. And as we did better and better, and as we weren't, just screwing up completely, I went to Jim later in the process and said, that sinking car, never been seen before, pretty unusual effect. And Jim says, oh, send me a budget. And so then I ran to the line producer, Ginny Nugent, and said, Ginny, get me a budget, because I don't know how to do it. and Jim gave us the okay, and that's why that ended up being the very last thing we shot, which we shot down near Los Angeles. We tried to find some hillsides that sort of looked lone piney, and shot that sequence down there. And I have no idea what color those pages were.
We also on almost every film you have this period right before you start shooting where the studio says it's too much money and you're gonna have to cut. And so there are things that were in the script that didn't survive, that we couldn't get back, that we wanted in. When Rhonda's up on the water tower and the earth movers coming to get her, the graboids dig out the water tower and it collapses, and she ends up on the ground with the graboids as this slow moving machine is coming toward her. And so that we lost. Miguel was going to lose his life. There were things that would have been different if we had just a little more money, but fortunately they did come through with the car. We were fighting for all of these things, though.
How did the, oh,
If I
I'm
may
sorry.
add to that, the non-collapsing water tower, I resented you for a long time because you wouldn't let me knock it down. And I remember distinctly coming up, aren't we going to knock the water tower down? No, we can't afford it. Please! And then going to each of the producers begging to knock the tower down, and we never did. Yeah, no, I remember.
Let me add something to what made Bert possible. I forgot to mention Ivo and his team, because yes, there are the words, but then you try to imagine what this is going to be like. You sit there alone in your room with a script, with a screenplay, and try and imagine things. And then you walk into a world that this man has created, and physically, it's like, oh, this is perfect. Here's this town that we've only talked about in the screenplay. Here's Chang's Market. Here's Bert's compound. Here's his basement. All of that stuff, it helps so much for an actor to walk into an environment that feels just right. And you think, I'm home. I'm home. This is going to be easy. All I have to do is say the lines. They've given us the entire world in which to work in, and all I have to do is stay out of the way of the script and not bump into your walls and your furniture. But he's part of creating that thing, he and his team.
And I've always heard that you dressed perfection from our dump. Is there truth to that?
If I may, I was thinking about this last night. One thing that Lone Pine cured for me was this dependency on Los Angeles and Hollywood, bringing the resources from there. When we first scouted the place, the parcel where we were going to build Lone Pine, I was freaked out because it was nothing for, a launch I think was something like 7-8 miles away. And so everything's going to have to come from LA, everything's going to have to. And very, very quickly, I realized that all you got to do is ask the wonderful people of Lone Pine, and there was resources, there was great, great talent here. I've made friends here, and I've given up the need to be dependent on Los Angeles when you walk into a new place that you've never been before. And the bringing stuff from the dump, I mean, basically as you're driving around and notice things, that would work, and then you ask about it, and people were more than willing to lend. I think one of the trailers that we got on the show, we rented for a case of beer. That
Sounds like a Lone Pine deal.
That type of generosity just blew me away. I mean, and I tapped into it, and so quite a bit of the stuff quite a bit of it, I would say close to 75% of it did come from here. We had to start a certain amount of construction in LA and then ship it up because it took a while to build the stuff. But yes, Lone Pine. And if I may offer a new slogan for the town, Lone Pine, a force of nature.
Yeah, we have a thing that says Lone Pine, little town, lots of charm, and people keep stealing the H, so it becomes harm. We're fighting that though. So I think also I want to assure you, Earl and everybody and Bert live here still. So we could go out and find them if you're so inclined. But anyway. We have a bunch, we have probably 30 or 40 call sheets, and what I noticed among many other things was that there was always a quote at the bottom. Some of them seemed to pertain to the actors and jokes and things, and then some of them seemed like Oliver North ends up on one of them. But so why were I've never seen quotes like that on call sheets.
That was our wonderful first assistant director, Mike DePuzian, who wanted a quote every day on the call sheet. And
they're quite wise.
Yeah,
Some of them.
They were great.
Yeah, they were. It's interesting.
Entertaining to read the call sheet then.
Yeah, there's a lot of information on the call sheets, like where you can drop your butts, your cigarette butts, and the fire marshal says this, and blah, 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 like that.
May I add something? You asked about how this has endured for 30 years.
Yeah.
And again, I think it has a lot to do with the script. These guys have created a comedy, a sci-fi film, a western, an action adventure film, all these different genres put together into one. That itself is amazing. At the core of it is a community of individuals fighting for its life. It was, these are very different people. Val and Earl, very different from Bert, Heather, Nancy, just wants to do her pottery and live in peace. Very different people. They all came together for a common cause. I think America could use a bit of that right now. As different as we are, we have so much in common, and this provided a common enemy. One of the things of which I'm also inordinately proud is the fact that, politically we are, this has, become a political football. We're a country with a lot of guns. Bert has a lot of guns. Bert loves guns. I've always been proud of the fact that in every one of these films, and this is something we always talked about, Bert never turns his guns on another human being. Never. It's the good guys. We don't shoot each other. We shoot the monsters. We are allied as human beings, on the same page, loving and caring for each other as we fight the bad guys. So Bert, and that's something we've watched through all of these films. Bert never turns his gun on another human being. And I'm very proud of that fact. It's something very important. In that sense, it makes it a very family-friendly film. This is something the entire family can watch, with the exception of a few dirty words here and there. It's still very family-friendly, I think. And violence is only about the monsters,
Good point. Have any of you ever lived in a small town? Because you capture that community spirit that we have in Lone Pine. If there's a catastrophe, someone's house burns, or someone loses a spouse, for any of those things, everybody rallies around them. It's like a family. Sometimes we fight, but when there's a need, we all come together. So you really capture that. For me, that's one of the special things about Tremors. I just wanted to touch on the kiss at the end of the movie, how that came about.
We had our first preview after we shot the film. We got some extra money from Universal to do some additional shots that we thought would be nice, of a graboid hitting under the Nestor's trailer, and a couple of the POVs going through the dirt, that sort of thing. And so we were feeling really good about the film. We went to a screening in Long Beach, and the audience loved the film. It was like the perfect screening. Everything was great, and the Val and Earl are at their truck at the end, and Rhonda and Val talk, and then Val leaves and goes back over to Earl, and they drive out of town. But as they're talking and getting into the truck, the audience stamps their feet and starts chanting, "Kiss her, kiss her, kiss her." And it was like, it was not something we really wanted to do, but the studio said, the audience will go mental if he kisses her. Literally, that was the quote. So we knew that the studio really cared about that kiss, and we thought we had another version where Val and Earl drive off, and they realize that their lighter, when they're going to light a cigarette, they don't have the lighter. They must have, Rhonda still must have it, so they do a U-turn, and that's the end of the film. You kind of get the feeling that they're going to be together. But the studio was really wanting that kiss. And so if that's all we had to do to make them happy, it was probably worth it.
What we were trying to get was, we had this running, I mean, you have all these layers in a well-written film, and one of the minor layers was Earl either had the Zippo lighter or Val had the Zippo lighter. So it goes back and forth very subtly. And at the end, Rhonda ended up with the Zippo lighter. She lights the bomb. Okay. So when they're driving out of town, what Val really wants is to be with Rhonda, but he doesn't have the guts to admit it. So when he realizes she's got the lighter, that's the excuse he needs to do a U-turn and go back.
And his line was, "Damn, that was a good lighter."
Damn, that was a good lighter. Now that's great writing, but it just, those people in Long Beach didn't get it.
The writer intellectual ending lost out.
It's my explanation.
There's a funny side story to this. By the time we had done this test and we had and been given this order by the studio, the town was gone. It had already been dismantled. So that's why when Val catches Rhonda up, they're kind of out by her truck in the middle of nowhere, and there's a piece of Nestor's fence and a piece of Nancy's fence, and that's all that's there.
Yeah, it's like 3 months later, right?
Yeah,
we all
something like
went
that.
back up to, like 6 people went back to Lump. I think Kevin had to put on a wig because he'd cut his hair. And so it was, if you look very carefully, it's very autumnal lighting in that scene because it's October, it's months after we finished filming the movie. There's a couple shots in the film that are squeezed in much later. You do that anyways, but it's kind of fun to look for them, see if you can pick them out.
Somebody told me a story last night, I think it was you, Steve, about Reba McEntire's audition.
Oh.
And would you talk about that? I just thought it was a story I hadn't heard before, and I just think, she had a lot of makeup on, and so a little bit about Reba's audition.
Reba, Reba and Michael both had incredible auditions. When Michael came in, he was just finishing Family Ties. You'd done the FBI murders that I'd seen that was really different kind of character, so I knew you had incredible range. But when you came into the office, you truly made me believe there were graboids under the floor of our office. Because
I mean, we have to be honest with when the studio first said, you really should read Michael Gross' work. Family Ties for the survivalist.
And then, but he blew us away. So and we believed in graboids more than we ever had. And then Reba was MCA's biggest, Universal's biggest recording star at the time, and so she wanted to get into movies, and they wanted to have her in it. And I was a first-time director, and I was nervous about somebody who'd never been in a movie being in such a major part. And so it made me very nervous, and I resisted. And they said, well, she's willing to fly herself out to LA to read for it. And then she came in, and also she was just amazing. And it taught me so much about casting and how you have to be open to explore different ideas, because Reba was Heather. I mean, she just was it. I couldn't imagine somebody being better for it. And
I think Michael's, I don't know if you remember asking Reba about her makeup, because this is part of the, I told the story I told last night. So, you know, she came in, she was totally country music star, right? And she read, and we had a shotgun there for her to handle, and she handled it really well, because we just knew that this woman had to be able to look real with a weapon and so forth. But at the end of this,
She had a load of makeup, right?
she had a load of makeup on, and
Just
Ron in his very unassuming way says, you know, this is kind of a country, well, I mean, a survivalist woman, and you have a lot of makeup on. Would you be comfortable maybe going with a little less makeup for a look in the movie? And Reba says, well, there's a lot of freckles under here.
I love that.
But she did. I mean, her look is very different in the film.
And she was an amazing, I mean, she was this huge singing star who had to stop her concerts and for this film, and she was sitting out in the middle of the desert with all of us. She almost had no makeup ever. I mean, she was just amazing and beautiful without any makeup.
We're going to take a change now. We're going to bring up a few more people. These are the original creators, really.